In this video, we're going to work through the enduring power of attorney for property. The first thing you need to do is to note that there's a lot of information which is published with and around the statutory forms that you should be aware of. Firstly, there are some detailed guidance notes that appear at the beginning of the printed enduring power of attorney form. You can get a copy of those by downloading them from here. And I definitely recommend you should do that before you start. Have them available as you're going through and read them beforehand so that you're familiar with the type of concepts and why you're being asked various things. There's also a detailed explanation of the effects and implications of the enduring power of attorney, and this is really more for the witness to use in advising the donor, but you can download a copy of that here, and you'll also get a copy automatically generated with the enduring power of attorney at the end of the process. But I recommend having both of those with you at the time you're going through the interview, because it will help you to understand what you're being asked and why and how you might answer various things. A preliminary question to consider is whether or not options that you are not selecting should be shown as struck out or not. So you don't have to. You could select no, in which case you'll just have a tick will appear in the area where you are making a selection, and the others won't show struck out. It can be more clear to show the options that haven't been selected as being struck out, so it's really obvious which was chosen, which wasn't. This can be a great option, but if you are not a lawyer and you're planning on taking your document to a lawyer to get advice, you might not want to choose this option, because if the lawyer suggests that you take a different approach to the one you have selected, it will make it a little more fiddly to make the change to undo the striking out of the text in the various places. So just bear that in mind, but I'll turn it on because I think it's generally a useful feature to be able to have. The first thing we need to do here is to say who the donor is, who the person is that's going to be granting the power of attorney, and so we'll select a title for this person. Usually it'll be Mr. or Mrs. You can select other, in which case you should enter the text down here as to what that title is. But let's say here it's Mr. Brian Smith. Now you'll see some questions are showing with red here. Those are mandatory. You must answer those questions to be able to proceed on to the next screen, or you'll see a message like this. Once you've answered the question, the red will disappear, and other ones like the middle name here aren't mandatory, but you can fill them in if you want to, or you know those details. You should consider whether or not the donor is known by any other names. Usually this will be no. If it's yes, click that and then just enter the other names that they're known by, and there as many times as is applicable. And you'll see in the guidance down here that it'll be under a heading of any other names by which I'm known with a colon, and these details will just go in at the end of it. Here I'm going to select no, but firstly actually if I have typed something in here, say known as me, then to get rid of that I can either come down here and I can edit a row, I can insert a row, I can delete a row, so I could delete that row just by clicking there. I could also click this X and erase the answer, and I can make the whole thing disappear by saying no, it's not applicable. And now we enter the address details. So you don't have to set the whole address. You can, if you want, put more detail in, but it will be fine just to say Wellington, for example. And you'll see in each of the party details that there's options to include phone numbers and email addresses. You can enter that or not, it doesn't matter. If you don't enter it, it'll just show up as a blank space in the document. And the last thing you have to do on this screen is to select whether or not the donor will be signing themselves, or whether someone else will do it for them in the presence of the donor and at the direction of the donor. That would be an unusual situation. It might come up, in which case you would then have to enter the details of who that person is signing on behalf of the donor. But in this case, the normal and most usual approach would be that the donor will sign themselves. And we've done that screen, so we can now click on Next to move into the number of attorneys. Now you can have 1 to 3 attorneys under this form. It will be very common for people to appoint their spouse as the attorney, and maybe only their spouse as the attorney, in which case you might only choose one. For checks and balances, you might want to appoint more than one person. You then just have to be careful that if we do choose 2, for instance, we'll have to work out how those attorneys are going to work together, whether they can act individually or only together. Okay, and we have another option now for each of our attorneys, whether it's an individual or a trustee corporation. So if it was an individual, very similar format to what we had before. We'll just go through. In this case, let's say Brian's going to appoint his wife. And so by scrolling down here, we can see wife. If you wanted to appoint somebody that wasn't one of those roles, there is down here, not displaying very well on our screen, other. And if you choose other, you can then specify what that other relationship is. But here we don't need to do that because we're going to go with wife, who also lives in Wellington, and we're not going to include the details of the phone number and the email address. Those things will change from time to time anyway, and the enduring power of attorney is supposed to be a long-lasting document that won't necessarily kick in until many years down the line. Now there are some other details that you have to check. You cannot have an attorney who's under 20 years old, or who was bankrupt, or who was subject to a personal order or a property order. You can check what those terms mean by clicking here to go to the legislation and seeing that. If you select yes to any of these, you'll see that an error message will pop up saying that this won't be able to take effect as an enduring power of attorney if the attorney is bankrupt, so we can't do that. So that's just a helpful check to make sure that we're not going off track there. Now we said that there was going to be 2 attorneys, and so we have to click here to add another attorney. And again, that attorney could be an individual or a trustee corporation. Let's say here it's a trustee corporation. So in this case, we've got the trustee corporations that are available. We might select that it's going to be public trust, and again, you could enter details of public trust, phone number and email address if you wanted. Now, because we have entered more than one attorney, we've got this question whether or not they will act jointly. So they must act together. Whether they can act severally, so either one of them could go and do something without the agreement of the other, or jointly and severally where they can act together or individually. It's really important to think about how you want this to work in practice. You can have checks and balances by having both attorneys needing to act together, but you then have to think about what will happen if they can't agree, or if they can act individually or severally, one of them goes off and does something that the other one wouldn't have agreed to. So there are advantages and disadvantages with each approach. You should also make sure that where you're appointing more than one attorney that they're both happy to act and happy to act in the way that you want them to act as well. So the next question to work through is, when is the enduring power of attorney going to come into effect? And there's 2 options. One, it's only if the donor becomes mentally incapable, so it's literally a backstop that's there in case something bad happens and the donor needs somebody to be able to step in and to look after their affairs for them. The other alternative is that it can have effect while the donor's mentally capable, so everything's fine, but you just want the flexibility that if you aren't available for some reason, that the attorney can sign on your behalf. And you also want it to be able to continue if you become mentally incapable. And the reason what's called an enduring power of attorney is that ordinarily a power of attorney wouldn't have effect once the donor becomes mentally incapable. So it's quite common for people to select this if it's somebody that they really trust, because it just allows a greater degree of flexibility. But there is more information in the guidance which you can get here in the pop-ups or down at the bottom of the screen to help make that decision. Our next question is whether there are any previous enduring powers of attorney, and if there are, what should happen with them. Now, if there's no previous power of attorney, then it's very straightforward. You would just select this and you'd be able to move on. However, if there is a previous power of attorney, then Commonly, the donor would just keep things simple and would revoke all the previous powers of attorney. So it's really clean that this now becomes the only document that people need to refer to. But it is possible to have an option where there might be a previous power of attorney and you want it to remain on foot. And if you go with that approach, note the guidance and the warning down here. This is where things can get complicated. If you've got two different powers of attorney which are both intended to operate at the same time, they cannot overlap, or there'll be the risk of conflict between the two arrangements. So this is where you should get some specific advice to make sure that whatever it is that you're hoping